Camera's a little too good. I look like shit. Hello and welcome to John Watches Weird Movies, the show where I watch movies you've probably never heard of and most likely will never watch. This week we're talking about G.L.O.W, the 2012 documentary about the gorgeous ladies of wrestling. A TV show that was on from 1986 to 1990 and featured exclusively women wrestling.
Until G.L.O.W, there really wasn't a glamorous exposure of women. Women were thought of as dykes, unfeminine. Why would you join wrestling? There's something wrong with you. You know, that was kind of the attitude. So, a couple things. First, let me say you don't need to know anything about wrestling to enjoy this movie. It's not really about the wrestling. It's a documentary, so obviously I can't go through the plot like I did with the other episode. I'd say what it's most comparable to is like sort of an E-True Hollywood story. It's about the show, really, which was on for 4 years and was a big success, even though I consider myself pretty well versed in pop culture and I had never heard of it before. Personally, I'm a huge wrestling fan, but that doesn't really matter because even the most diehard wrestling fans will probably only recognize one person in this movie. In G.L.O.W, she was known as Tina Ferrari, but most people know her as Ivory from the late 90s in the WWE. I had never heard of the show, but I'm honestly sad that I never got to see it because it looks so cool.
It doesn't have to be, is wrestling real, is it fake? Doesn't matter because they're like live comic strip characters. And that's what makes it fun.
We have got a cracker-jack show today, fans. The comic book hero Lightning squares off against the British bombshell Godiva.
It took a really unique approach to professional wrestling. It wasn't just a wrestling show, it was like a variety show. They had skits, they had music.
Hey, Fiji! Oh, Lord, Justice! I heard Big Bad Mama tried to strangle your pet vegetable. Ooh, she made artichoke.
Tons of really wacky characters. Each one had a unique name that told you like who they were. You got Little Egypt, Susie Spirit, Lightning, Hollywood, Godiva, MTV, Jailbait, Americana, Ninochka, Babe the Farmer's Daughter, Big Bad Mama, Dementia. Super cool. Two of my favorite characters are Spike and Chainsaw. They were known as the Heavy Metal Sisters, but the two women also played like these old 60-something-year-old housewives.
Arlene and Phyllis. The ropes are not too high.
Yes, they are too high. She can't get in. The ropes are too high.
Well, come under them then.
Why? I tried. Push the rope down.
We were in our 20s, you know, doing 65. They wanted sexy housewives. And I'm like, no, if you want us to create characters, we're not doing sexy housewives. They're not good or bad. Everyone's a whore.
That's the best idea I've ever heard. Another awesome character is Matilda the Hun.
Music, comedy, and real good fighting. And bitch fighting is good. People love that.
Matilda the Hun wrestled before G.L.O.W. I think she was one of the only ones who had, and continued wrestling 20 years later. In the 70s, she used to go to the local wrestling shows and they would make her wrestle bears.
They wouldn't let me wrestle a man. Not allowed in the State Athletic Commission. So they told me I could wrestle a bear. So they put me in the ring with a 750-pound, 7-foot bear. And I lasted longer than the men.
She's totally badass. Now, these weren't women that got into wrestling for love of the business. Much like the Backstreet Boys or NSYNC or something, this was a manufactured product. These women were taken from casting calls. They were mostly actresses from the ages of like 19 to 25 who were cast for this TV show and then had to be trained to wrestle. Most of them had never done it before. Most of the girls were hired not because they're athletes, but because they're pretty. Something a lot of wrestling fans know is still true today. The girls were trained by Mondo Guerrero, who makes a small appearance in the movie.
And they would drill on little things. Like, when we get a body slam, we always land like this. Well, let's practice that. Boom, 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 boom. Chin, chin to the chin, chin to the chin, chin to the... You have to, at the timing of the arm hitting the back at the same time, you're rolling back and forth. Just rolling. Then you start lifting one leg up, boom. Then the other one, boom. Then the other one, boom. Then both of them, boom. Then both of them. Then you get up and boom. Then you get up to the top rope and you go boom.
Mondo was Eddie Guerrero's brother. This is Eddie Guerrero. As of late, I've been into like a real 80s kick for some reason. And if you have any nostalgia about the 80s, you gotta see this movie because this show was the most 80s thing I've ever seen.
Hey, I'm Hollywood. Sure, I like to have fun, but I don't mess with drugs.
The characters are so outlandish. They got glitter, big hair, crazy costumes. So much terrible, like Chicago Bears style 80s rap.
Contusions, bruises, a gaping hole. A fight with chainsaw really takes its toll. Come wrestle with me, I'm so insane. The only sensation you'll feel is pain.
I'm super heavy metal bound. When it comes to fight, I don't mess around. They say I'm evil. They call me Spike because I use my torch whenever I strike.
Oh god, it's awful. What it's really about is the girls, and the directors of the documentary have tracked down a good number of them, like over a dozen. Most of the women did not continue to wrestle after the show ended. A lot of them went into TV, acting, so these aren't like wrestling legends by any means. What's really interesting, I think, is like these were all girls in their early 20s, and suddenly they were thrown into this business that they knew nothing about, and they had to keep up the illusion of wrestling, which was back then a very big deal. The good guys and the bad guys, or girls, had to be completely separated. They couldn't be seen talking to each other. They stayed in separate rooms, traveled in separate buses. That's always how wrestling had been up until the last 20 years or so. The show got really popular. The girls were on all kinds of talk shows, Sally Jesse Raphael, Family Feud, even though apparently it was never really meant to take off. It's alluded to in the movie that the whole show, which was backed by this really rich businessman, was just meant sort of as a device to do product placement for the companies that he owned.
Don't be a fool. Use Fabergé. Your mama knows best.
But in the 80s, it struck a nerve and took off.
People at first didn't know what to make of it, but they watched. And it grew.
If you're not watching wrestling, you're missing a major part of our culture.
It got so popular that Jackie Stallone, Sylvester Stallone's mother, got involved in the show, doing God knows what.
My girls have the strength and speed to wipe out all the kiddies' breeds. That's right. And when we're done, please don't be bitter. Because all that's left is kitty litter.
Now, every documentary has to have some drama, so even though it's fun and games for most of the movie, there comes a point where they talk about the dark side behind it.
There was pushing, and more pushing, of like, do bigger, do better.
The crowd would be out there chanting and going, break her arm, break her arm.
The creator of the show, the director, they were all kind of abusive. They would cajole the women, try to get a rise out of them to get a better performance.
Matt called me fat almost every day of my life, which was very frustrating. Told me I had a fat ass all the time.
There's one part where they talk about the injuries that they got, and there's some really gruesome footage. One of the girls gets like flipped or whatever, and she lands wrong, and the bone like in her elbow just like pops out, and they show you, and it's oof.
Pushed my arm backwards, so I tore the tendon off, and it was actually laying there on the mat, and I had to pick it up. The doctor came in, and I thought, oh, could you just put my elbow back in because I have to go to work tonight.
Frankly though, Dark Side isn't really that bad. The show was only 4 years, nothing really terrible happened, they all seem pretty well adjusted. So it seems like the movie's trying to stretch to make something more dramatic than it really was. To me, this movie was kind of disappointing. I love the subject matter, I love seeing the old footage, it's so cool, but the movie itself didn't go nearly as deep as it could have. It didn't really give any context. I would have liked some interviews with some network executives. Even better would be some interviews with some like notable wrestling people. Because you gotta remember, this was going on at the same time that Hulkamania was running wild. It seems like the filmmakers couldn't really score any big interviews. What it's really about is the women themselves. Most of them are in their late 40s, early 50s now. A few of them are older, they're not doing so good, they're in hospital care. Thankfully, there's no mention of anyone passing away, so it's nice to see that they're all still around. At the end of the movie, there's a big reunion of all the former cast, and it's really touching, and it's nice to see them see each other again for the first time in maybe 20 years. I enjoyed the movie, but like I said, I wish it went a little deeper. In the end, if I compare what this movie is to what it could have been, I can't help but give it only 3 Bjorks. I liked it, but it could have been so much more. Still, right now, it's on Netflix, at least in the US. If it looks like something you'd be interested in, I definitely suggest checking it out. I don't think you'll regret it. It's a short movie, it's only an hour 15, and that's all I have to say about that. Next time, we're going to talk about The Thief of Baghdad. Not the 1915 version or whatever, but the 1940s version, which is colorful, there's special effects, there's magic carpets. Aladdin totally ripped it off. It's gonna be a fun one. So that's it. Remember to comment, subscribe, like, all that jazz, and I will see you next time.
American whips
kids are all the same. They cry like babies when I give them pain. I fight to win, and that's for sure. America, I'm superior.